Best founders I've seen have a very strong point of view what they believe,
Hmm.
but they listen to everyone else's.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I am your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur who's built several companies to 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And today we have another great expert episode. We're going to have, we try it each week. We have our normal episodes where we go through the journeys of different inventors, and then we have experts come on every week as well and talk about different skills that may be helpful for startups and small businesses as they're trying to, whether it's raise capital or grow their business and otherwise navigate that journey to success. So today we have Brenden, and he'll give a much better intro about himself, but it's just as a quick intro. So Brenden does a lot of, whether it's YouTube videos, public speaking engagements, and helping and coaching people on public speaking. And it was we had him on the episode today because a lot of you guys that are startups and small businesses are looking to do what I would say public speaking, but in a bit of a different platform, which is when you're going to angel capital or venture capital or angel investors or any of those type of things, you really need to be able to present much like public speaking, present your invention, present your idea, present whatever your project is, whatever you're asking for money for, in a way that's going to resonate with a public speaker. So Brendan's going to come on and help us understand a little bit better about how to make sure that you convince people to invest in your company when you pitch it to them. So welcome on to the podcast.
Of course, thanks for having me, Dan. It's great to be on.
So I gave a bit of an intro, and we'll dive into what makes it or how to pitch it. But maybe if you want to give a little bit of your background and what makes you qualified to talk on such a great topic, and then we'll jump into it a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to do that. So I'm the founder of Master Talk. I make YouTube videos on public speaking communication. And how I got started was when I was in university. I used to do these things called case competitions. So think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So other guys my age were, playing college football or something. I was watching presentations and I was competing in presentations. So in 3 years, I did 1 year in venture capital, presented over 500 times, coached a lot of entrepreneurs, mostly in the tech space. And then after I got a job in corporate, I kind of asked myself, what can I do to make a bigger difference in the world? And I realized, and especially in the context of technology, that a lot of technical founders are really smart, very customer obsessed, know what they're building, but have a lot of trouble communicating those ideas in a way that somebody who doesn't understand their technology stack can help them with an introduction or a raise or something of the sort. So I started Master Talk to democratize the information and share it with the world.
All right, no, that's a great intro. So now with that as a backset, I set the stage and you said it even better. So let's talk a little bit about so if you were to take a lot of our audience and people that listen to that are going to be either just starting out the startup, maybe they just have an idea and they're going to cultivate it and then go pitch it, or they've done a pre-seed and now they're going for the seed round or that. But what are some of the things that they should be aware of, or the ways that they can better pitch or present their idea, their deck, or whatever it may be, so that they can convince investors to invest in their company?
Yeah, absolutely, Devin. I think a great way of starting this conversation is to talk a little bit more about what is a pitch and what is it for.
Hmm.
And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that a pitch is just a presentation. You're giving a pitch and then the pitch is over. But we need to realize that as entrepreneurs, pitching is an everyday thing. We pitch to everybody, investors, employees that we want to recruit into our companies, customers that we want to buy from us, and potentially venture capitalists, late stage investors. Every single stakeholder, whether it's the person who's organizing the event to the person who invests in your company, they're all being pitched to because they're all necessary to make your vision as an entrepreneur come true.
Hmm.
So the first exercise that we all need to think about before we even get into the 5-minute pitch and the 7-minute pitch is what I call the 1-sentence exercise. Most technical founders especially have a lot of difficulty summarizing their entire business in only 1 sentence. So I'll give you an example. One company I worked with called Invivo AI. So what they do essentially is they're an AI startup that helps circumvent the drug development process and save a lot of money. Let's just say the business is a lot more complicated than I just explained. These toxicity data and they parse the data and all that stuff, and it's super complicated. But even for a company like that, they're able to simplify their business in 1 sentence. We're an AI company that helps save big pharmaceutical companies money on drug development costs. So it doesn't really matter how complicated your business is. You need to be able to explain it in a way that your mom understands it, that your grandmother understands, that your grandfather understands. And if you can do that, it's much easier for you to enroll people who don't really understand who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and what they can do to support you.
Okay, so how do you go about? Because and I'd agree, because a lot of times you get a technical person, especially if it's a technical. Sometimes it's easier if it's a marketing person, if it's that founder, because they're used to maybe doing that pitch more. But you get a technical founder, which a lot of people are. They have a great idea, they want to develop it, and then I would still say, the best person to pitch the product is a founder. If the founder can't pitch it, you're not going to just bring someone on that's a rainmaker that's going to make it happen, because you're the best one when you do get into that question and answer session. But you're right in the sense that my experiences probably mirrors what you said. A lot of times you can't succinctly say what your product is or why somebody needs it. So what is a way, or what's the tips, or how do you help people, or how should people think about simplifying what their company is into that one sentence?
Absolutely. So the easiest way of doing this is to just talk to your favorite fans, like your raving fans, the people who use your product, the people who love you.
Mm,
Those are the best people who are able to explain your business to them. So let's take Airbnb as an example.
mm,
Sure, you can say Airbnb is a marketplace for buyers and sellers that exchange real estate assets temporarily to make a profit and for the others to provide accommodation. Or you can just say, Airbnb is a platform where you can rent out the extra room in your house for money, right? It's a lot more simpler. But that language usually comes from your customer, because when you talk to your customer who's an Airbnb host, they're not going to tell you, this marketplace allows me to exchange real estate assets. This is really interesting. Thanks for. No, this is it. Let's say he's talking to the CEO. Brian Chesky. It's great. I get to rent out the extra room in my house, make some money, and now with that extra money, I get to live a better life. I get to provide for my family. So when the CEO and the founders are listening to that, they're like, oh, that's the story.
mm.
Airbnb is not just about renting out rooms. It's about creating a world where everyone belongs. And by using that world as an incentive for them to enrich themselves, like make money and provide more opportunities for everyone else around them. And that's how Airbnb was able to develop its brand ethos from talking to its favorite and most loyal fans. So I'd highly encourage doing that. And it's going to be much easier because your customers will never describe the business in the way you would, because you're very deep into it, whereas your customer isn't. They're just using your service.
Okay. No, and I think that makes good sense. And I think that, so I'll ask one follow-up question and then we'll dive on to the
Please
next
do.
part of it. So if I don't know, what my product, if I don't have customers yet, right? So let's say I'm pre-revenue or I'm getting ready to launch, and you have some companies pre-revenue, the reason they're going out to angel investors or venture capital or whatever is to get the money to develop the product, right? So they don't have that luxury of going out to the clients or customers and saying, hearing their feedback and helping them hone their message. So if that's the case, then how do they get to that one sentence?
Right. So even in those situations, that's kind of like a middle ground there. I think it's really rare where you can raise money without anything, right? But I think unless you have like some sort of business plan, but I would recommend is if you can't talk to your customers, you at least think about who you want to be serving and why you want to be serving them.
Mm,
So one example is, let's say you're Airbnb, you want to rent out rooms in somebody's house, but you don't really have customers yet. You're still pre-revenue. The
mm,
next question is, you need to figure out, because there's some insight that you're operating on as a founder. You're not just going into this blind, or else the chance of you surviving is not very high anyways.
sure.
But let's just say you have that dream state. What you want to be doing instead is talk to future customers, potential customers, people who
Mm,
could become, because I always believe that obviously you can figure out amongst yourself too. It's just the reason why I don't recommend it, even if it could be efficient, is because it's just easier to get the messaging from the customer first, or else you'll just be stuck into this groupthink mentality where this guy's the CTO, I'm the CEO of this company, we know we're right, and then we send a message, and then half the VCs are sitting there like, so what do you do? Like, I don't really understand, right? And then everyone just gets lost. So I would recommend that, or just have conversations with other people. You can talk to potential board members that you want to have, or potential advisors, or just groups of people that you think would be a good fit for this product or service.
Okay, no, and I think that makes, and I think that even if you talk amongst yourselves, sometimes you still get it too convoluted, or it's not succinct, or it's not right. And probably in the sense, and when I do it on the patents and trademark side, kind of similar in the sense that, when we ask somebody what's unique or different about your product, that a lot of times they are so familiar with it, they've worked on it so long, and they know it so well that they say, well, nothing, there's nothing really that unique about it. It's what we've done is pretty obvious, and then you dive into it and it's not. And the same kind of thing is you've been with it so long that you start to look at it differently, or you're not able to explain it in a way to somebody that's not familiar with it would understand it. So I think that's a valid point. So let's say you get the one sentence, you do finally boil it down to the one sentence, and now you have to give the rest of your pitch, and it's still convincing. If you can convince somebody off of one sentence to invest in your company, you're doing awesome. But assuming that's not the case, then what's the next step, or what would be the next tip as far as to make a good pitch to an investor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the next three things that we need to think about are, which essentially is what's going to get people excited about your business and the opportunity that you have. So the first one is what we call traction. So traction means how fast are you moving? So let's say, for example, you're building an app, right? And you've taken 5 years to develop a first iteration. This tells us from a venture capital perspective that you're not moving fast enough to get to where you want to be, to get to the solution, whichever is the right one. Because in startups, you're always moving quickly. So you want to show, I'm starting with the easiest ones, and then we go to the hardest ones like product market and all that stuff, is you want to show that you're moving extremely fast. We started the company in January 2020. We had our first MVP ready in March of 2020, or some sort of timeline that shows that you're not just sitting around and doing nothing. That's the first thing. The second thing is what I call a unique insight. What's your secret sauce? So what gets venture capitalists really excited is when you tell them something that they don't know about the market. So let's say, for example, you say that these competitors are doing this, and this is why they're going in the wrong direction, but rather the solution is this, and you explain it very well, then venture capitalists get really excited because it's something that they go, oh, I never thought of that. But instead, if your unique insight is something that we already know, something that's obvious, then it's probably not a great idea because somebody else has already done it. Somebody else has already done a great job with it, right? So that's the next thing that you want to think about besides traction is, what is the insight that you're operating on? So I'll give you another example. So if you think about Airbnb as a platform, the reason why the timing for the platform was so great was because they started the company during a recession. So it was the perfect timing for them to increase the number of hosts on the platform because a lot of people started losing their jobs and they saw Airbnb as a way to make supplemental income. That's one side. The second side of the equation is a lot of people grossly underestimated the number of people in the market who would be willing to go somewhere else, to a stranger's house, and pay them money. Why? Because hotels were just so exorbitantly expensive that some segment of the market was willing to do that. And then the third thing that just a lot of VCs missed that Airbnb got correctly in their thesis is that Airbnb wasn't just serving underserved, poor communities. There was also a space for them to sell very high margin properties and rent out tree houses and castles and all that stuff at a very high margin. So there's a lot of things we can go into, but the idea is simple. You want to talk about the insight on the market that most people don't have. And if you're right about it, then venture capitalists are going to run after you. And then the third thing, which is, obvious, but it bears repeating, that's why I saved it for last, is what problem are you actually solving? Most people, whenever they build a product, and which surprises me when they start a startup, they're not basing it off of a singular thing or a singular 10x improvement in a product that somebody's currently challenged with. And if you don't have that 10x increment or even 100x increment, it's really difficult to justify venture capital funding because you need a very high return for the investment if your problem is correctly solved.
So if I remember right, first one is give them a timeline. Is that right? Is that the first one? Give them a timeline of how long you've been developing it and how long you expect to get to that, whether it's minimally viable product or on the marketplace or something of that, to give them an idea of this isn't going to take forever and that you have been working on it. That's the first one.
You got it. Just to add more layer. So traction also means the number of users and how quickly that's growing. Think about the first check in Facebook. Peter Thiel only invested in Zuckerberg because of the growth that Facebook was having. The guy was 19. He was super nervous. He had a terrible pitch, but Thiel saw the growth curve, so he invested in the company. So you also want to show that, especially if you're a SaaS company or if you're a technology startup working on an app.
Okay. So that one's the first one. And if I remember, second one is, or kind of your unique perspective, how the market is thinking this one way, and you're saying that's they're all thinking the wrong way, and this is the way they should be thinking. And that almost dovetails into the third one, which is now this is how we're solving that problem. Here's the wrong perspective, here's our perspective, and then this is what we're implementing to do that, and it will create a 10x return or 100x return or a large return such that it makes it investable. Is that right?
And one last thing, once again, stating the obvious, but just to add value here. In venture, we only invest in big markets. So let's say, for example, you got this amazing product, it's revolutionary, but you could probably serve 50 million like revenue. Like that's how big it can get. That's a great business, right?
Mm,
That's an amazing, small business. You should go for get a loan at a bank, but that's not venture backable, because venture backable startups means that you're shooting for much bigger. You're trying to build like the next unicorn. You're trying to build $100 million business.
mm.
So only in those situations do you want to take venture capital funding, because the returns just aren't good for a VC, because they would take a lot of risk for a lot of upside. But obviously that's obvious for people, so I won't go too much into that.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how obvious it is, because I think a lot of people think that if I go to an angels are a little bit better, but they still have that same expectations, although they're willing to take, oftentimes angels are willing to take a higher amount of risk, right? They're saying I'll come in earlier, but I also want an earlier upside, whereas venture capital, at least my understanding, correct me if you think differently, is venture capital is much, they want to see some traction, they want to see it further out in the marketplace, they want it to be somewhat de-risked, or at least have more proof. Angels are a lot of times coming in a bit earlier, but I think some people don't, or simply say, hey, this is going to be a good business, therefore it's investable. And there can be a lot of good businesses that aren't investable, in the sense that it doesn't give that 10x or that 100x. It may give a 2 or 3x, which is a great company for a lot of people. It just isn't one that's necessarily investable.
That's it. You got the right idea here, right? So one good way to think about venture is it really depends on the round. So let's say you're a late stage investor, then metrics matter. Like you need to have raised like millions of dollars already. You need to have a lot of revenue going. But there's also venture, which is the venture firm I used to work at, which was what was pre-seed seed round. So we wouldn't really pay attention to the metrics, but we did want to see your product. We did want to see some traction. We did
Hmm.
want to see some indication. Yes, as an entrepreneur, we would never invest in just a pitch deck or an idea, especially even at the pre-seed stage.
Okay. So now I'm going to switch gears or avenues just a little bit. So let's say you have an investor, or sorry, not an investor, a founder, a co-founder, someone's in the startup that's going to go do the pitching, and they understand what we just went through as far as the one sentence. They get their 3 points, and yet they're just what would be all terrible pitchers, or they get nervous, or they get anxious, or when they get asked a question that they don't know, they're not quick on their feet. How do you get, so is it simply that those type of people shouldn't be pitching it and they need to find someone else? Or how do you get to where you're in a better spot to say, hey, I do get nervous, I don't think quick on my feet, when I get asked a question I freeze, or something of that? How do you start to overcome those?
Absolutely. And that's the reason why I started Master Talk, right? So to provide all of that free information for people to learn how to pitch and not just what to pitch in the deck.
Hmm.
But what I would say is the way that you go through this is by two ways. One is you want to bulletproof your presentation. It doesn't matter how shy you are as a founder. If you present that slide deck enough times and there's enough people in the room who are willing to ask you hundreds of questions and just bullet you down, after you've answered 300 questions, well, when an investor asks you a question, you probably already know the answer, right? So what I do, and I recommend you all do this too, the people who are listening, is once you're done your pitch, the next thing you want to do is get feedback right away. Get 10 people you don't like, 10 people are really vicious, and get them to ask you a bunch of questions, not investors, just people that are really critical.
Hmm.
So that when they
So
go
get
through
10
you for,
attorneys that like to pick everything apart.
yeah, exactly. That'd be great. Yeah, you'd be perfect for this, Devin. And then what happens is when an investor says, "Hey, did you think about this?" You said, "Yeah, I thought about it because this person asked me that already." Right? So your confidence starts to skyrocket. The other thing I'll say is what I call the repeatable presentation. What the best speakers in the world don't tell you is that they only present one or two presentations, but they do it hundreds of times. So of course, if you have a demo day in a week and you just made your pitch deck, you're going to be nervous and it's going to be hard to turn around.
Hmm.
But if it's your 50th demo day, if it's the 25th time you're pitching, I mean, you're not changing businesses, or at least I hope you're not, right? It's the same business over and over again. Well, you probably know a thing or two about how to simplify it. You probably know how to explain this. And then at some point, it becomes like clockwork. It's not scary anymore because you're presenting the same thing over and over again. So that's the two things I would say.
Okay, no, I think that's good, and I think that a lot of times the only thing, and you can, again, you're much more of an expert, so it's a statement slash a question is, do you run a risk? So if you do enough of a presentation, I agree that you get comfortable with it, right? So you get first of all, you get, and usually even if you have somebody pepper you with questions, there's still the possibility that somebody will ask you a question you haven't anticipated, and I think, again, you can correct me. Sometimes it's okay to simply say, I don't know, or that's a great question. Let us go back and look at that, or let us take a look at that. And obviously, if it's a foundational question to your company, you should know it. But if it's something that's off the wall, sometimes it's better just to say, I don't know, or let me take a look at that, as opposed to try and make something up on the fly. But the one, that was in a tangent or aside, but the one question I had was, does there run the possibility if you rehearse through your pitch deck too much, or you rehearse it too much, or you do it too often, that it almost sounds a rote script, or it sounds, almost machine-like, or it sounds like you don't really care. You lose some of that excitement, or that, that emphasis on some of why you're there. Does that ever happen, or how do you deal with that?
Right. And it depends on how you approach it. So let's say, for example, you're presenting the same thing again, just for the sake of presenting it. You're
Mm-hmm.
like, man, if Brenden told me to present 25 times, I present 25 times. Why am I still at the same level? This stinks. But the way that you want to think about it is by asking yourself the following question, which are a different set of questions. So let's say you're at the seventh time you presented it. You're not talking about content anymore because you know your content. So now the question comes up is, what emotions am I conveying in this slide? What does my audience think of this slide? And then you start to get obsessed with those little details. And that's how you avoid being more robotic, but rather exponentially better than you were the first time. The only difference is the set of questions that you ask. But if you're just going through the motions and presenting it over and over again and expecting it, well, that doesn't work, right? So instead, what you want to do is just say, how can I make number 25 better than 24? And just to give an idea here,
Mm-hmm.
my keynote that I present to people, I've presented over 300 times. And I still present it 5 times a week. And it's the same thing every single time. But it doesn't feel robotic because I force it not to be. Because I've thought about the emotion, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. And to you, that might seem boring. But to the audience who's hearing it for the first time, you're like this incredible world-class speaker. And that's what I want for everyone.
Okay. So now I'm gonna switch gears yet again, or ask a different question. So how do you deal with the opposite now? So now we got the person that's nervous, that wants to not over prepare, but prepare, takes time, rehearses, do it, does it a whole bunch of times. You have somebody that's on the opposite side of the spectrum that thinks, hey, I can just get up and wing it, or I don't need to prepare, or it'll be more natural, or those type of things. Are those people good presenters, or what should they watch out for if they're on the opposite side? Say, oh, when I get into the venture, when I get to the venture pitch, I'll just wing it, and I'm good on my feet, and I'm sure I can deal with it.
Here's my perspective, Devin. If you're someone who wings, but you've raised money and you've done it successfully, then I have no feedback for you, right?
All right.
But if you're someone who wings it and you haven't raised capital yet, then I would suggest you prepare a bit more. Because
Mm,
especially in this fundraising environment, so if we were having this conversation 8 months ago, I
mm,
would say do whatever you want because the founders had so much leverage, literally before COVID. Because there's so much money in the system, you could literally raise money off a pitch deck. It was insane, right?
mm,
But now the tides are slowly changing and a lot of the funds are starting to tighten up. So you better be sharper than you were before because now the market demands it, right?
mm.
So if you want to get through that, I'm a big proponent of putting all the chances on your side, right? And I think preparing a lot for it will get you there because there isn't, like, I've probably seen 300 presentations now in my life
Mm.
of startups. There isn't a single one I haven't found a mistake in. Like
Mm.
I've always found a hole, at least one, usually 10 or more, but there's always a hole somewhere. So I highly recommend to prepare for sure.
All right, no, fair enough. So I've peppered you with a few questions, but you're the expert. So what are other things that I haven't raised and I don't know about that others should be thinking about as they're getting ready to pitch, or they're asking for money, or doing their pitch deck, or anything else? What would be any other advice or thoughts you'd have for them?
Yeah, I would say the last thing is you need to understand that there's different versions of your pitch. So let's say, for example, you have a demo day pitch, it's showboaty, it's 5 minutes. That's how it's supposed to be, right?
Mm,
You want to garner interest. But the real pitch, right? The real pitch is when you meet them one-on-one, when you meet the VC informally,
Mm,
in a one-on-one coffee chat where you're explaining the slides and the business in more detail. You want to make sure this is more advanced, but for those who are raising like a seed or a Series A, it's required, in my opinion. You want to have a bunch of backup slides.
mm,
Like every question that somebody's asking or criticizing you. So, for example, when I look at a business, I don't just say this is a great 5-minute demo day. That's just the first step. The second step is saying, what are the questions that we need backup slides for that a venture capitalist could ask us? So, for example, pricing breakdown between competitive services.
mm.
What is your opinion on the future of the industry? Where do you think the industry is going? Maybe you don't have time to go over that in 5 minutes, but they'll definitely ask you your opinion because they want to understand your point of view as a founder, because that's what matters, because you're playing with the future and the future is risky, so they want to see how you navigate through that. And those are just some examples. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that's going to be unique to you that you want to have in backups. The best founders I've seen have 100 backup slides.
And I think it gives the point of, it shows that you've thought through the issues, or you have a fully fleshed out plan. So even if you have that backup slide and you only spend 30 seconds on it, it provides that confidence. Okay, I'm working with someone that actually has thought these through, and they're not just kind of winging it, or they don't have a half or fleshed out plan. And a lot of times that gives as much confidence as anything.
Exactly. And I can give a super easy example. When I meet founders, this is kind of how I assess whether or not they're sharp. So
Mm,
let's say, for example, I ask them a question. I say, talk about your competitive landscape, like something super easy. Did you consider this competitor, like two big people in the space?
mm,
If a founder goes, oh, you're right, I should definitely consider that. Thanks for bringing it up. I know they're poor founders because they
mm,
haven't done their homework. The really good founders reply with, why are you asking me this question? Like, I obviously went through this. I know my business better than anyone. Those are the really good founders, right?
mm.
The people who aren't afraid to just throw it back in your face. But that's the kind of stuff that we look for, and I think those are the founders who have the highest probability of succeeding. So you want to make sure all your eggs are lined up for sure.
All right. So I'll ask my one more question, then we'll kind of wrap things up. So one thing, at least in my experience, when I've done a few pitch decks or pitches, I've also sat on the other side. I've been or done all of in between, but not to the level as far as you have. I've seen that you get some people that feel like they're being attacked, right? Or they feel like if you get a whole bunch of questions, or you poke holes, or you're pointing out things that they don't know, they almost go on the defensive, or they feel like they're being attacked, and so they get aggressive back. And at least my experience is that's usually not how that you want to react. You don't want to react aggressively back. But is there any thoughts? Am I wrong on that? Should you act aggressive back? Should you take that as input and say that's great? Or how do you deal with it if you feel like you're being attacked and your natural tendency is to be aggressive back?
Right. So my advice is best founders I've seen or have a very strong point of view what they believe,
Hmm.
but they listen to everyone else's. So a good person, I don't remember who it was, but they summarized it really well. The best founders in the world listen to everyone and ignore everyone all at the same time. What does that mean? That means that they understand everyone else's perspective. This is what Devin thinks, this is what Brenden thinks, this is what everyone thinks. But what makes them exceptional is they say, now that I've listened to everyone, I know which advice to ignore
Hmm.
that makes sense for me. An easy example I can use to explain this is a lot of people tell people on YouTube and stuff to go all in, to burn all the bridges, or to have a side hustle and not burn all the bridges.
Hmm.
Obviously, both types of advice can't be right for everybody. You can't do both. You have to do one or the other. And that's situational. So let's say you're trying to build the next Facebook. Chances are you'll probably need to go all in because your competition is going all in. And it's a network effect business. Only one person is going to win. Facebook was the one who won, and Friendster and MySpace are all dead.
Hmm.
But in, let's say, media.
I didn't know. No, just kidding.
But let's say you think about a media company like what I'm building with Master Talk.
Hmm.
I don't need to leave my corporate day job, even if a lot of people say, hey, Brenden, you should go all in. You're pretty good at this. But I say, no, the capital that I get from my job allows me to make these videos and produce without ever raising money. So I get to keep 100% of my business,
Hmm.
and I'm going to win. At least I hope so, because the competition that I have is very low. And
Hmm.
in that media niche, there's not many players to begin with.
Hmm.
And there's multiple people who can win. There's not just one YouTube channel in a niche that's successful. There's multiple. So notice in that example, you have to, as a founder, you need to say, okay, this advice makes sense to me and
Hmm.
this advice doesn't. But if all you're going to do as a founder is just reject everyone else's advice without thinking through them,
Mm.
then you're probably not going to win, because every human being is flawed in some way, shape, or form. And your ability as a founder is to say, this is what I'm really, really good at, and this is what I really, really suck at. So I need to listen to everyone else, even if it means I get, hit in the face sometimes.
And everybody's going to get hit in the face sometimes. You just have to learn to deal with it. So, well, there's probably another hour or two we could go on and all sorts of fun questions, but probably the only two that people would find it interesting was that you would be at some point. So I appreciate you coming on. I think it's been a fun conversation. Any parting words for anybody before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to say that as an entrepreneur, I think it's a hard journey, but it's also a fun one. I think you get to build something really interesting, and I hope you all realize that the earlier you learn how to pitch, the easier it'll be to navigate the process. Because remember that a pitch is not just a presentation; it's your daily life as a founder.
Hmm. No, I think that's great advice. Well, if people want to reach out to you, they want to get your advice, they want to hire you as a public speaker, they want to just be your friend or anything in between, what would be the best way to reach out to you and connect?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have any questions, or if you want like a free session where I just go through your pitch and give you some improvements, because I'm just doing that for free to promote the channel right now, you could just message me directly on Instagram. That's Master Your Talk. Or if you just want to send me a complaint or an insult, that's also fine. And if you want to check out my YouTube channel where I share all of my best public speaking tips to show you how to communicate the pitch deck, then that would be Master Talk in one word.
All right. Well, I certainly encourage everybody to check you out on whether it's Instagram, YouTube, or anything in between. Certainly, it's been very insightful and helpful from my end. I'm sure it will be for a lot of the listeners as well. So thank you again for coming on. It's been fun to have you. Fun to talk a little bit about how to make sure that you master pitching and make sure that you get lots of investor dollars. And appreciate the time and the effort. And we'll have to have you back on another time to talk about a few of the other questions that I have that we didn't have time for this time.
Of course, Devin, my pleasure.